The global COVID-19 pandemic broke a run of 12 consecutive season openers here on Phillip Island. We only returned here late last year in mixed conditions. Well, the weather's not with us either this time, as we're back to start the 2023 season with the Grand Ridge Brewery Australian Round. Spectacular South Coast views at this tourist hotspot, just a 2-hour drive from Melbourne Airport. The Phillip Island Grand Prix circuit has staged more superbike races than any other venue. This afternoon it hosts a record 65th. The venue itself dates back to the mid-1950s and the fans continue to flock in. Over 50,000 regularly attracted to our annual World SBK weekend. 4.5 kilometres of white-knuckle riding for our handlebar heroes. 850 metres of that is comprised of the Gardner Straight, the first overtaking opportunity of the lap into its longest braking zone. Even that Dewan corner, though, is high speed. This is the fastest track on the calendar, an average of up to 179 kilometres per hour, just 16 seconds per lap on the brakes. The two slowest corners are therefore the main action hotspots. Miller Corner, where the natural racing line leaves the door wide open. Jonathan Rea passing Alvaro Bautista there for the lead and ultimately the win of race 1 last year. And dropping down from the famous Lukey Heights into turn 10 is another opportunity for a jab. 12 iconic corners in all, sat alongside the Pacific Ocean at World SBK's most popular stage. ...2022 was another epic season in Superbike's latest golden era. 3 men representing 3 different manufacturers, sharing all of the 36 race wins between them. Bautista, Razgatlioglu and Rea are back to do it all over again. In fact, all of the top 10 from last season have stayed put during the winter for another go. Alongside them, newcomers Danilo Petrucci and Remy Gardner, plus old hand Tom Sykes. If last year was a fine vintage, 2023 could be the best yet. This is World SBK. You join Alex Raby and Steve English taking you through all of the action here on Phillip Island. Steve, our 5th season together, and so far each has seemed to top the last, and those winter signings certainly adding some extra spice to this latest campaign.
We saw a quick shot there of the Cape Barren geese, an animal on this island that has no predator. Alvaro Bautista has had no predator so far this weekend, but the rain's going to change that. We saw in the Supersport race just how difficult it was going to be out there for the riders. We're going to see the exact same in the Superbike class. 20 minutes until the start of the race, so even though it's raining quite heavily right now and you can see the amount of spray coming off Jonathan Rea's tyres, it can change very quickly here on the island.
Yes, Alvaro Bautista certainly the man with the target on his back, the reigning world champion, and the man wearing the number 1, having won 10 of the 12 circuits we visited in 2022. Mammoth season it was for Ducati last season, their first title in World SBK since 2011, and as a manufacturer, Yamaha won titles in both MotoGP and World SBK in 21. Ducati did the same last year. They've really made themselves the brand to beat again in motorcycle sports.
Yeah, they really have. They've put the resources in, they've made a big effort, and they've got the rewards, but now it's all about trying to make sure you're as adaptable as possible. We saw a quick shot of Dominic Gaganer, front row start for the World SBK debutant, but he's never really ridden this bike in the wet conditions. It was a 3-day Jerez test in December, and that was blighted totally by wet weather, but Aguilar was only able to do a handful of laps each day, so his experience in these conditions very much limited. We'll wait and see what the number 77 can do once we get underway. It's going to be 22 laps, so it's a long race here in Phillip Island. We saw in the Supersport class, it was all about having the full wet weather tyres on at the end of the race. That could be very different in the Superbike class because the conditions, they will evolve, and it could very easily dry out. We did see that last year where Alvaro Bautista was the only rider out there on slick tyres, and he was able to waltz to a race victory in the Superpole race. Obviously, whenever the rain's coming down like this, that's a very different set of circumstances.
Yes, a real sensation, isn't it, this weather, because we've had a week of running here on Phillip Island. We've had Monday and Tuesday, the pre-season official test, the Dorna supported test here in Australia. Then we've had the weekends running thus far, free practice, 2 sessions on Friday, another session earlier on this morning. We've had the Superpole session for Superbike, all of it in the dry, and suddenly we've got heavy wet weather here this afternoon.
Yeah, and where we are on the track right now with Toprak Razgatlioglu through the hay shed, this is a section of the track that you need to have confidence under your bike. You need to have the right tyres on. We saw Montevani in the Supersport class have a big crash there on the intermediate tyres. It was because he just couldn't get enough grip into those tyres. He could have aquaplaned easily as well. Once you've got that aquaplaning, or once you've got too much standing water out there, you need to be on the wet tyres. That's what dictates an awful lot for the riders. It's about survival in the early stages of the race rather than trying to have the right tyres at the end of the race if you take a gamble.
Very unusual opening race of the season, a delayed start as a result of the Supersport problems really with the wet weather conditions, and riders still making their way to the grid with less than a minute now until pit lane closes for Superbikes race 1. At least for the Superbike riders, there's not much doubt. You can see the puddles of water on the starting line. The only question is, if it does stop raining, how quickly will it dry over 22 laps?
Well, that's the big question. This is where Toprak's being smart. He's going to do 2 runs through the pits. He's lost his knee slider, actually. That's why he's coming in through pit lane, just to tell the team to make sure that they're able to bring out some spare ones for him. So maybe that wet weather knee slider just not quite attached correctly for Toprak, but he's also going to have the benefit of that second siding lap.
Yeah, still 20 seconds before pit lane closes, so Toprak is in good time to make that decision. As you say, a wise one, gives himself a little bit of an extra opportunity just to sample those track conditions.
Yeah, and no harm in that for Toprak as well, because we haven't been in the wet here since the end of last year, but track conditions are quite different to that. We've got 20 degrees air temperature. It was never this hot last year at Phillip Island. It's very calm as well. There's not really much of a wind blowing, so that means that the drying probably not quite as high as it could be as well. So the riders, if you're able to get that second siding lap like Toprak, it could give you a little bit of benefit in the early stages. We know Toprak on pole position as well. We've seen him in wet weather conditions able to make a big step compared to where he had been in the past. He's not as bad in these conditions as he was a few years ago, and he actually looks forward to the wet now.
So this is the opening race of the 2023 season. We better take you through the runners and riders on the grid. This is the reigning world champion, Alvaro Bautista. He is wearing the number 1, and he is the man who had the title wrapped up with a round to spare last season, ultimately winning by a 72-point margin. The Bautista and Ducati combination that first met in 2019 perfected itself last year, and they are the men who over the course of this season are expected to take some catching.
Yeah, certainly the top 3 from last year showed how strong they can be, and for Razgatlioglu and Bautista, they've been able to start this year like they would have expected.
Well, this is Dominic Egerter. What a sensational couple of seasons he's had, the 2021 and 22 Supersport world champion, leading the class with 27 wins from 44 races. He was also last year's Moto E World Cup winner. Well-deserved step up into the Superbike class. Turns 33 later this year. Has a fair amount of catching up to do. He's done some of it already today.
Yeah, getting the most out of the electronics in the dry conditions has been the challenge for Aguilar. He's going to have that issue magnified now in the wet conditions as well. But the good thing for him is the tyres are the same as what he had in the Supersport class, so he knows what to expect from the Pirelli rubber at least.
Those 2 men are those who will start 2nd and 3rd on the grid. Alongside them will be the 2021 world champion Toprak Razgatlioglu, who was fastest in Superpole earlier on today. His first Phillip Island front row and his 9th career pole. 15th front row start for Alvaro Bautista in his career. And as I said, Dominic Egerter with a front row start on his debut, matching Alvaro Bautista and Scott Redding, who did the same in 2019 and 2020 respectively. But it's Razgatlioglu who's the reigning world number 2, and the man expected to be the closest rival to Alvaro Bautista this season. He is Yamaha's all-time record holder for race victories. He's had 30 in 3 seasons with the manufacturer, 32 in 5 years in World SBK. Remember, after coming up through the Superstock ranks, he debuted on Kawasaki machinery in 2018 and 19, but a Yamaha legend these days.
Yeah, and on the right of the shot there, Davide, new electronics engineer for Toprak as well. Some changes inside his pillocks, but the one thing for Toprak that doesn't change is he's right at the front of the field.
Yes, he'll be keen to get off to a strong start to this 2023 campaign, because he had a sluggish start to last season. He was 79 points down after 4 rounds, and ultimately that was too much ground to recover. He was only 72 down at the end of the campaign, so it does go to show over the rest of the season he was a match for Bautista, and he'll want to hit the ground running.
Yeah, and that's certainly going to be the target for him once we get underway in around about 10 minutes' time.
Coming up, a record 65th Superbike race here in Victoria, Australia. It's time for the national anthem. The Australian national anthem ahead of the 2023 Grandridge Brewery Australian round, and soaking up all the atmosphere on the grid is our pit reporter Anthony Nelson.
Thanks, Alex. I'm by Dominic Eggert. They're just having a very quick chat right now. As you can imagine right now, the situation on the grid is difficult, especially for the riders who are coming into the World Superbike paddock for the very first time. Right now, the conversations are quite intense at the moment, so I might have to throw it back to you for a bit while they get this done.
Thank you, Anthony. Yes, totally understand that. The riders are in a pretty intense situation at the moment. So great to have a word from you and the line from you, the latest updates as you hear them or overhear them there on the grid. We'll continue taking you through the rider lineup then for race number 1. And we now move on to the second row of the grid to see Philipp Oertel, the German, world number 3 in Supersport, of course, in 2020. Season number 2 for him in the Superbike class with Go 11. Battles with injury last season, but managed to score 85 points, best finish of 6th in what was his rookie campaign. He was 8th in race 2 here in November, has an opportunity to better that from P5. Reigning world number 4, 6th on the grid here this afternoon, Michael Ruben Rinaldi, Ducati's golden boy, the 27-year-old from Rimini. From just over 100 kilometres from their factory. He's made all 150 of his Superbike starts with the manufacturer and contributed to teams and manufacturers' titles for them last season. Hasn't had a win, though, since September of 2021. His target and his New Year's resolution will be more trips to that podium. Here is your 6 times world champion, the greatest Superbike rider of all time, Jonathan Rea, set for his 378th race start this afternoon. That's going to put him clear of Troy Corser in the all-time appearance records at the top. Certainly more interested in wins and titles than taking part. 2 years finishing 2nd and then 3rd in the standings, leaving him determined to return to top spots.
Interestingly, the man that Jonathan Rea having the most discussion with on the grid there was his suspension engineer, so he wants to make sure he knows exactly what to expect from the bike when we get underway here. It is a situation we had last year as well. There was a flag-to-flag race where the riders had to come in to change to dry weather tyres, and that'll also be something that's a little bit of a discussion down there, so that's why it was a little bit of a panic on the grid with Anthony as well. The team's all making sure that they've got all their ducks in a row.
Third row of the grid then for Remy Gardner, Alex Lowes and Andrea Locatelli. And what a race in which to make your debut as far as Remy Gardner is concerned. It is a debut in the Superbike World Championship. He only just turned 25 earlier on this week, but he is an experienced face, 24-year-old, son of Wayne Gardner, Australia's first Grand Prix world champion. Remy himself was a world champion in Moto2 in 2021, spent last season in MotoGP, was released by KTM, and that's the reason for his high-profile switch to World SBK. And of course, Phillip Island, he says, is his favourite circuit, so where better to make his World SBK debut. Back to Alvaro Bautista then, who will be starting from the front row of the grid in P2. Bautista, who took 16 wins last season, tally actually matched by his first season with Ducati in 2019, but crucially Bautista far more consistent last year, 31 podiums from 36 races and only 2 retirements. That is what his rivals are up against. Continuing on with the grid then, third row with Remy Gardner, Alex Lowes and Andrea Locatelli. Lowes will start from P8, and watch out for him this weekend because he does go well here in Phillip Island, hasn't been out of the top 6 in our last 5 visits. The Brit, world number 3 in 2019 with Yamaha, now in his 4th season with KRT. 12 consecutive points finishes in what was a strong end for him to last season. 3 podiums in the final 5 rounds. He finished 6th overall.
Yeah, worth remembering as well, in that flag-to-flag race last year, he had a chance to win it. He was very fast on the wet tyre in the early stages, so Lowes in these conditions, always a rider worth keeping an eye on. And
Lowes, of course, took his most recent race victory around this circuit for KRT in 2020, and as you say, led until the pit stops in race 1 here last year. So the third row of the grid is completed by Andrea Locatelli, the Italian now in his 4th season in the World SBK paddock since leaving Moto2. A dominant 2020 Supersport World Champion. He's since recorded 6 podiums in the top flight. He's had 2 seasons with the official Yamaha team. 4th overall in 2021 with 4 podium finishes. Last season, 2 podiums and 5th overall. Row number 4 for Danilo Petrucci, Ilkka Iker Lecuona and Michael van der Mark. Petrucci, the big name signing over the course of this winter, and a man to watch, if only for his big profile over a decade in MotoGP, twice a Grand Prix winner there, most famously in Mugello in 2019, and 6th in the world that year.
And always very strong in the wet conditions. So Petrucci on that number 9 machine, certainly a rider we're going to have to keep an eye on.
One incredible talent, Petrucci. Had a go at the Dakar Rally. He was away in America last year for Ducati, finishing 2nd overall. So Petrucci, very much a man to watch in World SBK. Iker Lecuona and Michael van der Mark alongside him then on row number 4. We are running out of time on the grid, aren't we? I think that's going to be just about it from the grid here in Phillip Island. Van der Mark on row number 4, Redding, Bassani, Baldassari, Gerloff, Vierge, Baz, Sykes, Granado, Shireen, and then Koenig. Just a couple of moments then until we fire up the engines. Here's a full look through the permanent rider roster for 2023.
Under 2 minutes now, under 3 minutes I should say, getting down to 2 minutes. Now until the start of our...
Danilo Petrucci, Remy Gardner, Tom Sykes, Dominic Egerton, Lorenzo Baldassari, Eric Granado, Oliver Koenig, Hafiz Shari, Michael van der Mark, Philip Erton, Boris Baez, Garrett Gerlach, Xavi Vierge, Axel Bassani, Alex Lowe's, Andrea Locatelli, Michael Ruben Rinaldi, Iker Lecuona, Scott Redding, Jonathan Red, Toprak Bezgakioglu, Alvaro Bautista,